is going to be chaired by Professor Sabyasachi Chatterjee. May I invite you, sir, to come over the dais? May I request Sri Sainath ji to come over the dais? And now mic is over to you. Yeah. So,
I feel elated to introduce Sri P. Sainath, who is a well-known Indian journalist, popular for his writing about poverty, structural inequities, caste discrimination, and farmers' protests. He is known for his book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which is a collection of his field reports as a journalist and focuses on different aspects of rural deprivation in India. He was awarded the Rahman Magsaysay Award in 2007 for believing that journalism is for people, not for shareholders, and for writing about those who have been left behind. In 2012, he served as the Magro Professor of Writing at Princeton University. He won the inaugural World Media Summit Global Award for Excellence 2014 in Public Welfare for exemplary news professionals in developing countries. He founded the People's Archive of Rural India in 2014, an online platform that focuses on social and economic inequality, rural affairs, poverty, and the aftermath of globalization in India. He was a senior fellow at Tricontinental Institute of Social Research and was earlier the rural affairs editor at The Hindu in 2014. Sainath is also a photographer. His exhibition, Visible Work, Invisible Women and Work in Rural India, has been seen by more than 6 lakh people in India alone. The exhibit toured internationally and included a showing at the Asia Society. The economist Amartya Sen called him one of the world's great experts on famine and hunger. Over to you, sir.
now, may I request Dr. N.P. Chaubey to say a few words about Dr. B.V. Rangarao on behalf on which memory this lecture is organized.
Namaskar to everybody, Mr. Chairman, sir, and Bhai P. Sainath ji. First, I welcome you. A hearty welcome to the 4th B.V. Rangarao Memorial Lecture this evening. Professor B.V. Rangarao was well known to him in his young days when he was studying at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And when Professor B.V. Rangarao's wife contributed rupees 2 lakh to the academy for creating this memorial lecture, she asked me that I should invite him, and they have family relations. And for a long time I was trying. He was not able to locate which Rangarao because there may be many. Some Rangarao he knows, so he was getting confused. But now, when he got it clear, he accepted the invitation with pleasure and come. I am grateful to you. Who was Rangarao? This Indian Social Science Academy owes a lot to Professor B.V. Rangarao. He was one of the founders of the academy. He was a vice president of the academy. He was elected president of the academy, but he suffered heart attack, because of which he could not take charge of the presidency. He survived later on for a longer period. Why he suffered heart, that is a source of inspiration to those who wish to pursue science, not politics, not politicized science. Professor Rangarao was a nuclear physicist. He studied in England, son of a rich landlord, and many, though from Andhra, who went to studying land, they returned as a socialist or communist. and they donated their properties to poor people and all that things. Rangarao was also one of them. After doing his PhD, he studied at Osmania University, then went to England, did his PhD in nuclear physics. Later on, he became a professor at Osmania University. Then he went to CSIR. From CSIR, he invited to JNU by G. Parthasarathi, who was mandated by government of India to create Jawaharlal Nehru University, and with such persons who have done outstanding work in their areas. And one of the new thing was the Center for Policy Study. So G. Parthasarathi invited Professor B. Rangarao to set up Science Policy Study Center in JNU. And he came as a head from CSIR to JNU. He was a very demanding professor. Those who will work with him, it will not be easy. He will ask you to do very hard work. And every sentence that he will write, he will check 20 times whether it is appropriate or not. Professor Rangarao wrote a paper in 81, 82 on agribusiness. The agribusiness big industry corporate sector was entering India. And he wrote a paper showing that this now the corporate capital will take over the agriculture in India, and that will destroy agriculture, so-called green revolution and all that. People of India will become much poorer. This is a problem. This was not liked by the corporate capital, and after all, corporate capital does not function in vacuum. They have their support in the politics, in the government, in the academia, among the scientists. So a group of academia, scientists and students organized protest against him in JNU. And some of them claimed themselves to be Marxist also. They were very close students, etc. But they joined it because knowingly or unknowingly, their patrons are sitting somewhere. They ask you, you start agitation. That led him to heart attack. That was the thing. And Rangarao, there were few professors who were brought in JNU, like Yogen Singh, Rangarao, D. Banerjee, who were very outstanding and never afraid of the vice chancellor or the prime minister or anything, not demanding. So in the executive council also, they will be very vocal. They will not allow any wrong things to happen. So Professor V.V. Rangarao is one of them, although very quiet, very serious, but will not tolerate any kind of wrong things. That was his characteristics. Academy has a publication and that is still very valuable. It organized a national seminar on social perspective of development of science in India. Science. And that book is, I hope, still maybe some copies we have displayed here. I don't know, but that's there. The book is edited there, and those who wrote that book gave what is the perspective of science. And today, again, there is a need. Today, science in India, had he been here, he would have said it is just an empty phrase. Because you don't find that kind of scientists who have a rigor, who have commitment, who are not looking for assignment in America or elsewhere. They are building science in India. That was the what Professor B.V. Rangarao stood. When he survived, went to Hyderabad, built a house. He invited me that you come and stay here. He has built a very big house. You don't have a house, so you can stay, but you don't bring academy's office here. That was his condition. The only condition was that you come, as many rooms you want, you bring your children, family, and stay here. But don't bring academy's office elsewhere. During those days, I had a lot of meeting in Osmania University. And now for last 10, 15 years, I have stopped, and also my traveling has become very difficult. But Osmania University is one of the major center for activities of India in Andhra Pradesh. It was here, there we organized Andhra Social Science Congress in Telugu. Well, judges and others will be sitting and they will asking, you don't understand Telugu. I said, don't worry, you have deliberations in Telugu and things. But it continued, now it is no longer active. Those who started, they are dead, they are no more. So that is the brief information about Ranga Rao. And this is a fourth memorial lecture. I am very, very happy. Kamala Rao is no more, his wife is no more. That I am able to fulfill her desire by inviting Bhai Sainath. And I hope Sainath will become integral part of the academy from today onward. I will not be here, but he might help in keeping this academy in walking on the path. And the path is only free science from politics, which Hegde called in his presidential address, and allow in our science in India, we be master of science in India, not allow Americans and others to decide. And the only way to do it, unless you have science education research in all Indian languages, neither you can build science, nor people of India who fund this will benefit anything. And remember what Rangarao used to say, 300 years Indian people, all Indian languages are deprived of science. Now, this is a big dream of those who founded it. There were so many like B.K.R.V. Rao, M.S. Gore, B.M. Udgaonkar, and P.M. Bhargava, A. Rahman, Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee, all these people who created with a different hope. And so far we have survived under low nutrition. Let us hope with Sainath joining, we shall be able to. I welcome you once again and request the chairman to start.
So welcome again to Mr. P. Sainath, and all thanks to Professor Chaube for introducing the work of B.V. Rangarao. And we are fortunate enough today to have such a distinguished speaker amongst us, whose writings I have been ardently reading, many of you would be perhaps, ever since he wrote his booklet on the GATT and the WTO. That was in, I think, 92, 93, around that time. Since then, he has been writing, enriched all of us, and it is my privilege to invite him to give the fourth B.V. Rangarao Memorial Lecture. Sign up, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thanks to the organizers. Um, Actually, Professor Rangarao was already a very, very established and eminent figure when I just entered the JNU campus in 77. I also remember him as having had a major role in shaping the framework for a national sector in pharma. In fact, he made major inputs in the Patents Act, in the IPR's debate as well. So it's quite an honor to be delivering the lecture in his name. And today my subject is journalism a social science? Uh, a small thing before I begin. This coming month, the 22nd of April, will be the 200th anniversary of real Indian journalism. Unfortunately, in the media schools and journalism schools, they talk of journalism in India beginning with um, Hickey's Gazette, the Bengal Gazette. They were neither Indian nor were they journalism, really. And of course, you have another trend that says Indian journalism began with Sage Narada. We'll skip that. I will duck that trend because it's complete utter nonsense. Though there were other scribes in India for over 2000 years, there were. But journalism, in the sense we understand it, it begins in 1822, April 12 or April 20, yeah, April, mid-April. with Raja Ram Mohan Roy founding Miratul Akhbar, a straight newspaper for the elite, by the way. And my Bengali friends always get a little nervous and somewhat rattled to find out that it was not a Bengali newspaper. It was in Persian. Raja Ram Mohan Roy knew 10 languages: reading, writing, speaking. He learned French at the very end. And but he published in Bengali and English. English Bengali was his main thing. He published, see, Persian was the court language in his time. It was the language of the elite, it was the language of the Mughal court. So it was quite the thing to run a journal in Persian. And he was equally fluent in all these different languages. It's astonishing that the first edition of Miratul Akhbar and Kaumudi Sangbad had been started by him, but he was not editing it at that point. The first edition tells us what Indian journalism can be, what the links between social science, research, writing are. The first edition of Miratul Akhbar carried a devastating critique of a judgment where a Rayat, a peasant, Pratap Narayan Das, had been ordered by the district judge of Komila, had ordered that he be whipped for some minor offense, that he be publicly whipped. What happened was that the police whipped the man so hard he died. Raja Ram Mohan Roy wrote an impassioned piece about it, detailing in micro detail what had happened and talking about it in place after place. His article got translated into English. He must have done the translation and was published by James Buckingham and other journals. It created such a furor that it had a dual fallout. The district judge of Komila was hauled up before the Supreme Court of England. Okay, that was one impact that it had. The second impact it had was that the Governor General cracked down on the press because of this, because it was embarrassing. Remember, it was still East India Company ruling. This is 1822. It's the East India British ruling through the East India Company. They cracked down, put a number of anti-press, like in our time, sedition cases, all these sort of things. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, compare how he reacted with how so many of our great media people have buckled at the knees at the first sign of threat. He shut down Miratul Akhbar. He said, I will not work under such dehumanizing and degenerate and humiliating circumstances. Very cleverly, after shutting it down, he took the politics and content of Miratul Akhbar into Kaumudi Sangbad. So it was that was Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and he continued, but he learned a lesson from it. He started then addressing not the elite, but in Kaumudi Sangbad, made it a language, a paper for the masses. Whatever literate levels of masses there were at that time. So consider that is the great Indian tradition in journalism. But is journalism a social science? Let me begin by rashly claiming that journalism is perhaps the most interdisciplinary of all streams. Though the word discipline seems to contradict the word journalism, because there is no discipline in journalism. But it is a very interdisciplinary stream. See, over the course of their careers, most journalists will have covered and reported things as varied as sports, slums, stock exchanges, celebrities, film stars, and the film world, politics, municipalities, the fire brigade, the legislature, the courts, industry, and more. Journalists are generalists. They can cover, I mean, they can be sent out for anything. Of course, in our time, that has narrowed down increasingly to commercialized sports like IPL, celebrities, corporations, and the ultra rich. But you see what I mean. Journalism is not only the most interdisciplinary of all streams, it is also the most undisciplined of all disciplines. The most chaotic amalgam of streams from both the social sciences and the arts and humanities. The question of whether journalism is part of the social sciences or whether it is at best an unruly outgrowth of the humanities, believe me, it's actually been debated for a century. The first major paper on it goes back 97 or 95 years ago. One of the earliest and most significantly interesting ways of looking at our profession came from Eric W. Allen, who wrote a paper 95 years ago, Journalism as an Applied Social Science. Over the next 9 decades, hundreds of debates took place over this. Who are we? Where are we? What are we? That one was in the original Journalism Bulletin, Volume 4, Number 1, March 1927. Others too grappled with that notion for decades after Allen's paper, right down to the present day. Coming to India, some universities in different countries have tried framing journalism as a social science. In Germany and others, it's happened. Still, it has been mostly courses in arts and the humanities that have prepared people to be journalists for perhaps a century now. In many Indian colleges, when journalism came in the first department, Nagpur University, but in many Indian colleges, journalism department was for decades simply an additional portfolio for someone from the English literature faculty. Okay, so head of English literature would become head of the journalism department. It's not actually a very relevant connection at all, but that's how it happened, because it was thought that proficiency in English is journalism, right? And then though there is a far greater tradition of debate in journalism in the Indian languages than in English. Start from the time of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And then from the 1990s, journalism departments in India and elsewhere were increasingly merged into departments or schools of communication. Okay, so they became from journalism departments to schools or departments of communication, something that was seen as more vocational or professional, or essentially focused on journalism as a skill, not as a learning. Focused on journalism as a skill, not as a social science or a thinking and learning process. The skill too gets more narrowly defined each decade, and you break up personally, it becomes more specialized, so to speak. Personally, I never went to a journalism school except to teach, and I teach at two very regularly. In ACJ Chennai, I come for my module on covering deprivation, and at the Sophia College Mumbai, and I've taught abroad in some schools. I never went to a journalism school to learn because I was trained as a historian in Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi in the late 70s, which is when I met Professor Rangaram. I maintain to this day that my training as a historian made all the difference to my journalism. For instance, if you're a rural reporter covering issues of land and agriculture, it adds immeasurably to the depth of your work if you have an understanding of land relations, if you have an understanding of the history of land ownership, tenurial systems, peasant indebtedness, bondage, migrations, and a lot more. I certainly gained enormously by trying to apply to my own journalism the rigor to be learned from the sciences, arts, and humanities. In my, by the way, as I said, I was trained as a historian. My my teachers were, my favorite teacher was Romila Thapar. She was my teacher. So were people like Bipin Chandra, Harbans Mukhya, um, S. Bhattacharya, and S. Gopal from Chennai. In my fourth year in the profession, I began to teach journalism at different schools. As I confessed to my old teacher, Professor Tapper, I seemed unable to teach my students any journalism unless I first taught them history. I was sitting, a generation was in the classrooms who were foreigners in their own country and society, you know, who knew little or nothing of their country's colonial ordeal, of what India's struggle for independence, which is now being rapidly rewritten in the last 4 years, rewritten wrongly and for the worse, and free. They had no idea about what the freedom struggle was about. I was very embarrassed by that to begin with. I soon began to understand how important it was to engage with that. The more so as journalism was seeing the creation and imposition of more specializations, some of them vital and necessary, some of them quite ridiculous, and most of them coming up to serve the profit drive of corporations. Okay? The specializations that came up. Corporations were becoming increasingly, and today are, the owners of journalism in this country. Via, they are owners via their overwhelming control of media infrastructure, outlets, newspapers, television channels, portals, you name it. Clearly, and this is the first very important conclusion, the first of my important points, we should no longer use the words media and journalism interchangeably. They are very different entities. Media are commercial entities. Media, Mr. Samir Jain once said in one of our arguments in the late 1980s in journalism, Mr. Samir Jain, owner of Bennett Coleman and Co., which in my newspaper we used to affectionately refer to as Bandit Conman and Co. Um, Mr. Samir Jain said, journalism is a business like any other business. I differed. I said, media is a business. Newspapers are a business. Portals are a business. Channels are a business. TV is a business. Journalism is not a business. Journalism is a calling. Look at who your greatest journalists were. We'll come to that in a moment. In recent decades, there have been senior and thoughtful journalists and editors who have seen journalism, my second point, as a bridge between all the sciences, pure sciences, social sciences, humanities, between the knowledge of the wealth of the sciences and the lay public denied access to that knowledge. Even pure sciences, because remember, there's a whole field called science education, science communication. Where would that be possible without journalism? It's not possible without journalism. The agenda, so a lay public is denied access to that knowledge because of the agendas of those who own journalism. When profit is the sole and driving motive, I will cover you if there is money to be made in covering you. Why the hell should I cover you otherwise? Um, during At the height of the farmers' suicides in this country, 2006, when thousands of 17,000 farmers committed suicide in this country, according to the official figure, which was nonsense. I was one of 6 journalists from outside Vidarbha covering the farmers' suicides in Vidarbha. I was at Yavatmal. I counted 6 journalists from the entire country in the country's greatest spree of suicides. 6 journalists from the media outside Vidarbha actually spent a week in Vidarbha. 2 of them didn't intend to spend a week, but they missed their flight and they had to take the next one 2 days later. So, at the same time, at the very same day, on the very same day, 1 hour's flight away in Mumbai, 600 journalists were covering the Lakme India Fashion Week. Even more ironical, the theme of the Lakme India Fashion Week, the theme of the Lakme India Fashion Week that year was cotton. 1 hour's flight away, the men and women and children who grew that cotton were committing suicide at the rate of 8 a day. This is the break between media and journalism. What media is and what journalism is. So is journalism then the bridge between the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge of the sciences, arts, and humanities and the lay public. But the public are also denied access very often simply due to the nature of the highly Brahmanical nature of discourse in all sciences. You know, the jargon of those streams, of all streams of sciences, they're a foreign language to ordinary readers. That's why we exist as journalists. Okay. For instance, let me give you an example. Now, all of us, it is very hard for a non-specialist, however educated, to physically or mentally survive reading the first 50 pages of the average IPCC report on climate change. I'm not saying the reports are bad. They're incredibly good reports, but reading them is a challenge to your sanity. Every second word has 9 syllables. Okay? It's not possible. The technical nature of the language is completely, it's a foreign language to the reader. In recent times, there has been grudging admission, even in a very condescending fashion, where people have been calling journalism, they're describing journalism in a condescending view of journalism as hurried literature. Journalism as hurried literature. Personally, I find the bridge view very important. Journalism is a bridge. And for instance, in the People's Archive of Rural India, which I have run since I quit the Hindu in 2014, we've created a model of how, okay, never mind. We've created a model of how journalism can contribute to the public and also to the social sciences and the humanities. And yes, even the pure sciences, in terms of bringing what ordinary everyday people are doing. We collaborated with the National Center for the Biological Sciences in Bangalore, one of the finest institutions of science in this country. Our reporting of climate change was through the voices and lived experience of ordinary people, through fishermen who are on the front lines of climate change. The front lines of climate change, through farmers who are seeing declining productivity rapidly due to climate change, desertification, and so on, through nomadic pastoralists who are going higher and higher in the Himalayas in search of the highest grazing grounds in the world because of global warming. Okay, so this is the sort of thing that we did, and it was very good to find that many institutions of advanced science got in touch with us asking, can we do similar collaborations? Okay, because they also were finding it important to get feedback on their work direct from the laborer on the field, direct from the fisherman in the sea. That we learned a lot from our collaboration. Now, we would not have got to where we were without the NCBS, which educated us on the fact, which I had no clue of, that 2/3, 3/4 of the crops in the world are dependent on pollinating insects, and 40% of pollinating species in India are on rapid decline, several of them facing extinction. How that is going to affect, how profoundly that will affect your food production, I don't need to tell you. You can imagine your worst nightmare. It will be slightly worse. So we were learning, but none of this would have mattered if we were not connecting this to what we were learning from the farmers, the honey collectors, the forest dwellers, and the fishing communities. Yeah, so, and had we not returned journalism to the art of storytelling, not as bulletins and things, but in terms of telling it through the lives of people. Telling it. Right now, we are running a series from Tamil Nadu. Aparna Karthikeyan, the author of that series, is sitting here, looking at 7 important crops in Tamil Nadu, but actually looking at the lives of farmers through the universe of their crops. Okay, ragi and ragi farmers. Salt, we consider salt a crop. It's cultivated. You're doing irrigation for it. You're doing all those things. Salt through the workers in the salt pans. And their lives through the crop of salt. Turmeric in western Tamil Nadu. Now, that when we did serve as a bridge, we found that the science communities, and we are finding that that is a huge hit. When it came to climate change, our own reporters, in creating all these bridges, every one of the reporters who participated in the climate change series told me they were learning things they had never imagined before. And importantly, they were learning from people whom they never imagined they would be learning from. That's being a bridge, not a flyover. And that is also a concept, a subclass in the theory of bridges. If, let me put it this way, if the spirit of inquiry, if that is driven, if the spirit of evidence-based inquiry and investigation is at the heart of science, then journalism is a science. Because that's what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to investigate with evidence. It's a different matter that the media do not do it. That's why I'm saying there is now a divergence, 2 entities. There is media and there is journalism. Because that is what best journalism has always sought to do. A Rajaram Mohan Roy. Look, who are the greatest journalists in Indian history? Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and many of you will be very surprised. The third name is Sardar Bhagat Singh. We all know of Bhagat Singh, the revolutionary, the martyr, the political activist. Please, for God's sake, he was a professional journalist and the only journalist in Indian history. Rajaram Mohan Roy knew 10 languages. He wrote in 2 and published in 2. Bhagat Singh wrote in 4 languages, learned a 5th and started writing. He wrote in the magazines Akali in Punjabi. He wrote in Urdu. He wrote prolifically in Hindi. He wrote in Punjabi, in Kirti, in Hindi, in 10 journals, in Veer Pratap and Arjun. And he wrote in English prolifically. He learned Bengali briefly while underground, wrote 1 or 2 articles, but of course, the Bengalis will not allow you to write in their language without the most serious censure. And then he gave up on that, but he started in jail in the last 270 days. He taught himself Persian and was experimenting writing with that. Here is a person, in the last 270 days, he checked out 330 reference books from the library and had to go on a hunger day strike, 9-day hunger strike, to get the right to use the library. 330 books the man checks out for reference. That is the spirit of inquiry, social science research. Now look at Gandhi and Ambedkar. We try to treat them as pamphleteers. in the, if by going by the definitions of corporate journalism, they were pamphleteers. Tell me how many journalists you know who can claim to have published 100 volumes of collected works. Both Gandhi and Ambedkar established and ran 2 or 3 journals. Under what conditions? Under colonial rule, when you could come to your office to find that everything was shut up and locked in chains, and there was no electricity from the days when electricity began in the press. Now, so these were they were also social scientists inquiring into the state of their society, as was Dadabhai Nauroji, whom Gandhi always said, my education came from Dadabhai Nauroji's poverty and un-British rule. He says, my education in economics came from Dadabhai Nauroji. What is good journalism after all? Let me define that for you in one line. Good journalism is that which engages with the great processes of its time. Look at Gandhi. From the day he went to Champaran, from that day he understood that there can be no independence, no Swaraj, nothing without the energy of the peasantry. That converted a wretched Gymkhana party called the Congress into a political party and a movement by bringing in the masses. He fought for Swaraj, independence. Ambedkar, the great process of his time, still continuing. He fought the greatest battle ever for human dignity on this planet. A battle that still continues, that is still relevant, and that's why Gandhi is relevant, and that's why Ambedkar is relevant even today, and that's why Bhagat Singh is relevant. Bhagat Singh engaged with the process of imperialism, not just against British rule. You look at what all he was writing about, about things happening in Russia and things happening elsewhere. He was engaged with the processes of exploitation and oppression everywhere. Against inequality, these were the great processes of their times. And that's what the 3 of them addressed. Look at today. Both academia and media have lost that moral compass. Let us say how I believe that all media fully and academia have disgraced themselves on, say, the issue of agrarian crisis, farmers' suicides, inequality at levels not seen since 1870, according to the World Inequality Report. In India, not since 1921. Have you seen that kind of a divided society as we have now? But at least journalism or individual journalists and non-corporate publications at least engaged with the issue earlier. Good journalism has one force to contend with, that especially good journalism has to face it. Academics don't have that force to contend with. Immediate public criticism and accountability. Academics don't have to contend with that. We have to, especially if you're doing good journalism. For the first 10 years of the agrarian crisis, the media and academia ignored it. Okay, and with I will say with 2 or 3 glorious exceptions, like Professor Utsa Patnaik, who told us in 1996, Republic of Hunger, we are staring at the greatest agrarian crisis in our history. That's what Professor Patnaik said. And in fact, I would say that I learned what the heck the meaning of agrarian depression is from Utsa Patnaik. In 2017, you look at the arrogance of the elite of academia. We had 2 dons of Columbia University, Jagdish Bhagwati and Arvind Panagaria, ridiculing the idea of farmer suicides as a serious issue. They dismissed it as being idiotic. Please read their book on the 70th anniversary of Indian independence. I wear that book as a badge of honor because the entire chapter on farmer suicides is an attack on my own work in the field. They ridicule the idea. You know what these guys have written? The great economists, the great eminent dons of Columbia Don Bhagwati and Sancho Panagaria, what they wrote in that book was that, in fact, they said only 200,000 farmers have died at that point. Only 200,000 farmers have committed suicide. That is a very insignificant number when you consider that 53% of the population are farmers. Hmm. Now, first of all, it shows that they don't know who is a farmer in India. The actual percentage of farmers is not 53. 53% can be the agrarian society. But everyone in agrarian society is not a farmer. Everyone in Bollywood is not a hero. Okay? Everyone in Bollywood is not a hero. The larger structures of Bollywood are the light boys, huh, the technicians, the guy, the clapper boy. There are much more of them than there are heroes. In agrarian society, cultivators are different from the rest of agrarian society. And the number of cultivator percentage of full-time cultivators as defined by the Indian census is less than 8%. 8% in India is 95 million. It's another matter. If we include all marginal farmers, meaning those who are cultivating for less than 6 months, it goes to 9.9%. If we include every category of agricultural laborer, the entire thing comes to 22%. And then there are others like artisans, weavers. These are all part of agrarian society. They are dependent on how agriculture is doing, but they're not farmers. Now, these guys, I don't know what research they did, or they just must have put some interns on doing their research because they're too important. They have to pronounce on the state of the world every day. Uh, Now, this is the kind. Another thing, I think there are disadvantages and advantages in journalism which we bring to the table of knowledge. The disadvantages are our indiscipline, our superficiality, very poor reading. Okay, I keep telling my students that, just you're all wonderful guys, and they usually are. One thing, reading never killed anybody. But I see the look on their faces saying, their look on the faces tells me, yes, reading never killed anybody, but I don't want to be the first. so, so that I mean, this is typical of journalism today. Okay, from a Bhagat Singh who read 300, who referred to 330 books in 270 days. Very poor levels of reading, but there are many advantages to what we do. One is no blind acceptance of data. I keep asking my economist friends, when they make their presentations, I love them. I often tell them my job, I often tell my progressive economist friends, sometimes I think my job is being your translator. I translate your economies into English. Uh, I ask my economist friends and academic friends very often, how of this data that you quote religiously, how often have you met the people who put together the data? Journalists meet them. I have stayed with census enumerators. In Palamu, in the 1991 census, I stayed with an enumerator, a good Tiwari, hmm, who was to count all the Birhors in the Latehar circle. He was too frightened looking at this ancient tribe to go within a mile of them. He sat there. I was staying in his house. He sits with the sarpanch. They guess how many people there are in the settlement and they give everybody names. And what they do, the Birhors have single names. They are not in a bureaucratic society. They don't need a middle name and a last name. They don't need all that. So Birgu becomes everyone, and everyone's name ends with Ram because the enumerator is a good Tiwari. Hmm? So, and all the women become Devi. Birgu Devi or Birgu Ram or at best Birgu Das, something like that. They do this. So I told the enumerator, I told the sense, Arey yaar, I'm going to meet them. I've come here to meet those people. Go with me. Why are you afraid of going to them? He said, वो लोग अरे वो आदमी का मांस खाता है. They're cannibals. I heard the same from enumerators in Koraput Hills about the Bondas. Utter nonsense, illiteracy of a different level, but that's how it happens. Now, I consider the Indian census to be one of the greatest sources of data in this country, but you don't take it uncritically. See, at the aggregate level, the minuses cancel out the pluses. Okay, overcounting in one place cancels out with undercounting in another sense. All this happens. I believe the Indian census is the greatest data source. However, when you disaggregate the data, you are in big trouble. If you do not have a critical approach, and that comes, I believe, more easily to journalists, if you do not have a critical approach, you'll get into very big trouble. The Birhors are a nomadic tribe. They move in a triangle between Odisha, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh. They are known by different names: Birhor, Mankhidi, Mankhidia. Then one census, they showed a sharp plunge in population because they were on the nomadic trail and they missed being counted in any place. The next census, they were double counted, and the Odisha government put out a press release saying, thanks to the efforts of the government, the Birhor population has doubled. Okay, so please, now I give you one more example and wind up with that. Water, rainfall data is critical to our existence and survival. Okay, rainfall data is critical to the survival of this country, of the Indian people. In early 1990s, I heard about a fantastic model block in Madhya Pradesh, in Jabua, which was producing model data, and academics had praised it in one or two papers. The chief secretary of government of Madhya Pradesh told me, Sainaji, you must visit this place. Not chief secretary, was the rural development secretary. He said, you must visit this place. This is the model we are going to follow. And I looked at the data. It was meticulously compiled. And it was also a lesson in how the best intentioned, non-corrupt people can produce nonsense. Because the question for the person, one block officer, he was a low-level block officer putting together the rainfall data. How did he put the impeccable tables? The question for him was, how did you put together all this data when not a single rain gauge is working in your block for the last 3 years? Mind you, he had a very honest and answer which I respected. He brought two files. One file, all his letters to his superiors in government saying, please sir, madam, rain gauge, no rain gauge is working. Please replace rain gauge. Please replace rain gauge. He got no replies. Another file was warnings from the government superiors. It has been noted that you have failed to submit rainfall data by desired date. Please note that departmental proceedings will be initiated against you if this continues, if the lacuna continues. Absurd. So he said, sir, then I said, so then how did you create the damn data? He gave me a perfectly valid explanation, but one problem. He said, sir, block is not a geographical entity, it is an administrative entity. The block is an administrative entity. So I don't have a rain gauge. I took the data of all the surrounding and neighboring blocks and averaged it out with some neat mathematics. You know the problem with that? Well, it was a very good answer. There was no rain gauge working in any of those blocks either. And they were taking They were taking his data and as the model, and so 7 blocks were producing nonsense, and which was being hailed as a model. I believe journalism is more equipped to do the search on inquiry on this than academia. And so, also we are not stuck with data from a census 9 years ago. Look at what happened in the pandemic when the reverse migrations took place. The media at least were forced to contend with them, though they didn't. Mostly they, after 1 week of coverage, they gave up, because once the migrants left the city, they weren't bothered anymore. People's Archive of Rural India had to report them from the villages. Our reporters reported they went to the migrants' villages with the migrants and reported, like Purushottam Thakur in Chhattisgarh. Academics will wait for the surveys, the census, the long-term series studies. Hmm. In the long term, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long term we shall all be dead. Right? So if you're wanting to know what the hell is going on just now, that becomes the job of the journalist as social scientist. At least the media were forced to. Lastly, I think that Indian journalism has been severely hampered by its abject imitation of doctrines of North American journalism. You know, we have no critical view on why and how the so-called doctrine of objectivity came up, which none of them ever, those doctrines are fully discredited in North America. Right of reply, balance. Do you see anyone giving Putin a right of reply? Did you see anyone giving Saddam Hussein right of reply? Did you ever see, when you say both sides of the story, did anyone ask Muammar Gaddafi for his side of the story? Nonsense. But we parrot all these phrases, and if you look at the advertisements of the best TV channels, they say only the facts. There is no understanding. What is a fact? How do you define a fact? And facts don't add up to the truth. That is something different. You can have any number of facts, they don't add up to the truth. How you organize, analyze, sequence, and nuance the facts will give you some indicators and trends. So this doctrine of objectivity, I will give you one little anecdote about it. Do you know how it came into being? There was a quack in the United States in the late 19th century, early 20th century. His name was Brandeth. And he used to sell fake medicines, placebo medicines, that cured everything from acne and ingrowing toenails to cancer. You can call him Baba Brandeth. Okay? He sold all these medicines. Baba Brandeth. Now, 2 reporters. By that time, journalism had come to rest on advertising revenue. Okay? 2 reporters did a fantastic exposure of this Baba Brandeth. You know what happened? Their newspaper collapsed because he pulled all his advertising. And all the other newspapers were on notice because he was the biggest advertiser in that town. So then they started creating this thing of right of reply, in which some scientist supporting on his payroll would give a scientific rebuttal. For the next 100 years, the biggest advertiser in North American media was tobacco. And every time that the Surgeon General would say 1 million Americans have died of tobacco, lung cancer from tobacco, and they would give equal space to the tobacco industry's fake scientists, countering the Surgeon General of the country. So you're equating truth and nonsense in the name of balance, and so this sort of stuff. So that doctrine of objectivity is nonsense. But there are 2 other forms of objectivity. One is the objectivity of the pure sciences, which is admirable but not replicable. What I mean is, suppose my friend Sabyasachi claims tomorrow to have achieved cold fusion in a laboratory. 10,000 labs across the world will replicate the experiment to see if it is true, because they operate in controlled conditions in a laboratory. Journalists operate in the laboratory of the world. There are too many variables and we can control nothing. We can't control our owners and newspapers. Okay, so what the hell will we control? So the thing is that the discipline of the pure sciences, what I don't like the word, but for want of another descriptive term, the pure science. It's admirable, it's worth learning from, but it's not replicable. But there is a third form of journalism. There is a third form of objectivity, which is simply your personal honesty and integrity to deal with the subject to the best of your knowledge, which is what a Gandhi did, which is what a Ambedkar did, which is what a Bhagat Singh did, which is what thousands of Indian journalists did over the first 170 years of journalism. In conclusion, this is my point, that journalism that is driven by corporate owned, profit maximizing media can never be a social science or any other science unless you consider money making to be a science. I suppose that can be argued. Uh, it is not a social science, but it has become an anti-social science. Yeah? The science of serving the needs of corporate greed and profit maximization. Like the Lakme Fashion Week, the farmers committing suicide were not important. They didn't produce revenue for the newspaper. Do you know that the Times of India issued a memo to its reporters? When I was reporting for the Hindu from there, it was very embarrassing that a Chennai newspaper was reporting more than the Marathi press in Maharashtra about farmer suicides in Maharashtra. Young reporters in the Times of India, some of them my own students, went to their management and said, we should also be covering this. They were given a memo saying, dying farmers in Vidarbha do not buy the Times of India or its advertisers' products. The elites of South Bombay do. They were at least honest about their stand. So I'm saying that journalism can never be a social science, it can be an anti-social. But journalism driven by the greater Indian tradition of a Ram Mohan Roy, a Gandhi, an Ambedkar, a Bhagat Singh can be an applied social science. And more, it can be more than that. See, a good newspaper, a good journalism is a society, a nation in argument with itself. That is what it is. A nation in argument with itself, in conversation with itself. At the People's Republic, People's Archive of Rural India, this is what we seek to do, to combine the knowledge, the arguments, the positions of the different branches of sciences, social sciences, arts, and humanities, and to produce that bridging experience between the wealth of that knowledge and the lay public. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Sainath, for giving a talk with such a wide sweep, beginning from Miratul Akhbar all the way to the present day journalism, where we also know that there's a breed nowadays which is called embedded journalism. But even within those parameters, it is highly enlightening to be reminded that yes, even in such a scenario, you can follow the kind of examples that were shown to us by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Gandhi ji, Ambedkar, Bhagat Singh, or should I also include the name of Maulana Azad? I think I should do. And in our times, I was very inspired by brief pieces that I've read in Frontline of Mr. E.M.S. Namboodiripad, a very, what I would say, busy man, but still he chose to wrote only one page. I think there is a lot can be done. And as a science which dialogues within the society, this is the kind of definition that we would like to see. And for that, it is thrown open for discussions. This is for you now to dialogue with Mr. Sainath. Please, Parthsarathi.
Yes, sir. Good evening, fantastic lecture. I would like to know this poverty line keeps changing up and down. Is it really a journalism follows the ethics in defining the poverty line, or the economics discuss the data, or to show we are shining, we reduce the poverty line? How I would like to know from you what
See,
exactly was the poverty line.
yeah. Well, please sit, sir. You have the poverty line emerging in the 60s, 70s from various debates, including the famous debate of Sukatme, Professor Sukatme, in whose name you gave me a medal the day before yesterday, and Dandekar and Rath. Now, and the idea of how it was done, I've written about this in my book. In the appendix, you'll see the creation, the magical poverty line. What happens is you set a certain number of calories which you think are appropriate for people in rural areas, and a certain number of minimum calorific consumption for people in urban areas. Originally, this was 2,400 calories and 2,000 for rural people who have a more physically laborious existence, and 2,100 calories for urban people whose roles in life are slightly more sedentary. Not slightly, very much more sedentary. So this was then the planning commission came up with the idea that you list and categorize consumer groups, consumer levels of expenditure, groups, social groups according to levels of consumer expenditure. You calculate how much does it need for you to have those 2,400 calories in a month. How much does it require for you to have those 2,400 calories? And how much does it need for you, if you're an urban person, to have those 2,100 calories? Now, in that list, the consumer groups are many, not one or two. There are many, many. You draw the line, all those below that minimum expenditure required for that calorie, for gratification of that calorie norm, all those below that line are BPL, are below poverty line. It doesn't mean the others are well off. It just means that they can get those, because the poverty line never took into account, and this is actually a travesty of a very noble intention. Why did our founding generation, they never took into account shelter, education, clothing? None of these were taken into account into the form. Do you know why, sir? It's very interesting. Because they believed in the constitution, they believed in the freedom struggle values, they believed only individual per capita expenditure should be seen, because they believed that all the rest should be provided by the state. They sincerely believed the promise of the freedom struggle was that food, clothing, shelter, all those were to be given by the state. It's there in your directive principles of state policy. It's implied there. The right to food, the right to nutrition, the right to health. So, this is what the original founders meant by restricting it to individual per capita expenditure. In the next 30 years, we betrayed all those promises of housing, shelter, etc., but we retained this narrow definition of poverty. So that's what happened.
followed by Chittiba. Yes, madam,
Well, thank you, sir. I mean, I don't know how many times as a student I might have said thank you for a wonderful lecture. But the first one was, I think you were giving a talk on the laborers in the coal mines in the then newly created Jharkhand
Correct.
at Miranda House, and I was a student there. And I'm still that student in your talks each time. However, as much as I appreciate your recognition of the necessity of a historical perspective in journalistic writings, one of the things that dissociates academics from journalists is footnoting, where academics mention the sources. And in the present times, what we call the era of post truth, where information, fake news, all kinds of things are in circulation. As you mentioned, the distinction between media and journalism, and the whole fact checking industry by each of the news channels. They fact checking their own industries. Uh, where do you situate journalism in the present times, and how does it survive? One of the biggest challenges is that.
One is, see, there's another difference, you know, by the way, footnoting, please. So, footnoting in itself, when I write, I mean, you'll find I use endnotes in a book. But in journalism, you're supposed to state the source in the text. You don't need to give a footnote. If you give a footnote, P.G. Wodehouse once wrote an entire essay on the hilarity of footnoting. As a journalist, I'm expected to tell my name, my source, and yeah, when I use published work in digital journalism, I link to the original source. We do that so that you can immediately go and verify. Hmm. But there's one big difference between academia and journalists, at least our kind of journalists. Our kind, good journalism treats ordinary people as important sources. Academics don't. Yeah, we we treat individual. See, for me, I'll give you an example. What bad journalism does and what good journalism does. Tomorrow, there is a drought in Marathwada and then a crisis in agriculture. Reporters who have been trained in conventional journalism will all flock to Aurangabad. Hmm? Who is the first person they will talk to? They will talk to the collector. The collector in Marathwada may be somebody who came there 3 months ago, an IAS officer whose home state is Rajasthan, who hasn't yet learned Marathi properly. He is treated as the authority on agriculture. For me, the woman who has tilled the soil of that land for 45 years is 100 times more important a source than the collector. I go to the collector last. When I have seen what I need to see, I have much better questions to ask him, which I can then watch him struggle with the answers because he doesn't know them very often. Right? We treat the fisherman as a source. We have Kavita Murlidharan here who has done an incredible story on climate change through the lives of fishermen. In this state of Tamil Nadu, in Pamban, they have become so advanced in they have set up their own radio station, community owned, Kadalosai, sound of the waves. And in that, they are learning about climate change. They are the ones to tell you about the warming of the waters. They are the ones who are going to do all this. We treat those individuals as important sources, which they are. So that's another difference. About the question of survival, yeah, it's a constant battle for survival. It was also a constant battle for survival for Gandhi and Ambedkar. Ambedkar closed all his 3 journals finally. He couldn't continue with them. It's going to be a battle where it's going to be a war where we lose many battles, we win some. Ultimately, I think that the contribution of they may have lost battles, but they won independence for the country. So I'm saying that we can always hope for that is what good journalism is. But I'm saying categorically that it cannot be done in the framework of corporate driven media. It cannot be done. It is not a, yeah.
Sir, thank sir, thank you so much for the lecture.
Thank you.
So my question and that what I wanted to learn from you is that the formulas. So I'm proud of you because you are one of the forefront leader spearheaded the movement, and especially if that connects to the 19th century famines, the whole 19th century, never before after, every 2 years in India there was a famine because of the food exports from India. Second is the subsistence crops replaced by the commercial crops and various other things. And because of these British policies, the East India Company especially took away so much food from India. And which we wanted to connect this to the post-independent India, especially the present farm laws issues. I was little worried about the obedient media of the country, the narrative they have which imposed on the farmers, saying that these people are so and so, and negatively. When government withdrawn for their political reason, they immediately changed the narrative. So the what is the future of the media in terms of even their own people representing their own people?
Yeah.
How they change their faces? What is the future of this?
Correct. So, firstly, Chinibabu, I thank you for giving me so much importance, but I was never a leader of the farmers' movement. I was merely the guy who told their story, and I was one of those who told their story. Secondly, all your questions are very important. I think, by the way, once the era of neoliberal globalization begins, we start using many of the kind of measures that the colonial government used. Remember that we are also using the kind of political laws that the colonial governments framed. You know that in this state of Tamil Nadu, journalists in Coimbatore were arrested under the Diseases and Epidemics Act. Yeah, under the Diseases and Epidemics Act. You know the last famous person to be arrested under the Epidemics and Diseases Act? Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Gandhi, of course, and sedition we know, but many people don't know that the last person convicted under that act was Tilak. Okay, so we are doing much of that same. Now the famines, you're right. By the way, please notice the complete synchronity of famines with colonial rule. After the British left India, you never had a famine of that scale. You had one in I would say 1967 Bihar was, but you had huge public action. Sarvodaya, JPIs, all kinds, thousands and thousands of people. Even in the Maharashtra drought of 1972, you had huge public action. Tens of thousands of volunteers. I think in the Bihar drought of 67, I think the scale of public action was unprecedented. Never after that have we seen that kind of action. In Maharashtra drought, many of the succeeding political class were actually volunteers and activists in fighting the drought. Now today you don't have such a phenomenon. Okay, it's much more, we are much more atomized and individualistic. Right? What's there in it for me? And the same with the media. It is a commercial media, you're saying their own people. They don't see them as their own people, they see them as markets. They see them as what money I can make out of you. And that's where the concept of paid news comes from. Why should I, if you pay me, I'll cover you. Now, someone starving in Marathwada is not going to be able to pay you anything to get covered. Another thing that happened is that, see, it's very interesting that after 1947, the word famine was. Do you know that, by the way, in Maharashtra there is a law on the statute books banning the use of the word famine. 1963 Act, it's called the Deletion of Famine from All Applicable Laws of the State Act 1963. It was unanimously passed in the assembly. Though I believe their reason was different. The nation still had the memory of the Bengal famine. People, it was a word that created panic. So that was the generation that had come out of the freedom struggle. They said, yeah, let's do. In 1990s, Maharashtra passed another GR that no collector has the right to declare drought. Okay, it has to be centrally declared. Yeah, all this kind of stuff they did. So you were moved further and further away from the objectives that you formed your nation with. You are very, very far from them now. The most important point I think you made is about the shift, and that is at the heart of the crisis of the last 30 years, the shift from food crops to commercial crops. That has devastated. We got millions of small farmers to shift from a crop that sustained them to crops for export. Kerala, thousands of farmers shifted from existing crops like paddy into growing vanilla. When there was a 2-year demand in the US, because vanilla supply from Brazil and Mexico had a frost winter, bad winter, millions of farmers in the third world started growing vanilla because the US offered high prices. I used to beg my friends in Kerala, don't do this, don't do this. This is they told me, you are mad. If someone is offering us 4,000 rupees a kilogram, they said, listen, we will grow rare Amazon orchids if someone pays us that amount. In 2 seasons, the price fell to 68 rupees when Brazil and Mexico came back to the market. And we had hundreds of vanilla farmer suicides in Kerala. So that cataclysmic price crash and price fluctuation, 4,000 to 68 rupees, is not a fluctuation, it's an annihilation. So that the bringing of cash crops without safety nets for people who simply should not be, and it also meant much higher indebtedness, because 1 acre of paddy in 2003 in Kerala, 8,000 rupees in Wayanad. Incidentally, Wayanad, the district draws its name from paddy. It's Vayalnad from paddy. You cannot find 30 acres of paddy in Wayanad. It's all commercial crop. And it is subject to huge global price fluctuations, price shocks. So we made these people, when you shifted to vanilla, you were incurring costs. You were incurring costs of, from 8,000 rupees an acre for paddy, you were incurring costs of 1,45,000 rupees per acre, almost 15 times higher. If you were going to put 2 acres, you're going to put 3 to 4 lakhs invest. Where do you get the money from? No bank would give you that much. In the first season, the US Vanilla Federation gave them a lot of free inputs, etc. Now, you're going to borrow from 5 places, from money lenders, cooperative bank, national bank, private bank, and it all added up to suicide for hundreds of farmers. So that remains a huge issue. Shift from food crop to cash crop. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to have your comments on the decent report which you wrote as member of the Index Monitoring Cell, the Government of India Committee, when in India's World Press Freedom Index, India's ranking was 142 out of 180 countries. And this ranking was done by a Paris-based organization, Reporters Without Borders. I want your comment on what was the ranking of UK by this Reporters Without Borders with regard to UK, which has imprisoned Julian Assange. What is the, where do they figure in the Freedom Index? One is this. The other is that a group of ministers on communication was set up, which recommended neutralization of journalists. So I wanted your observations, comments on that.
I called the last point you made, I called it that the committee's recommendation was for neutering of journalists. Yeah. So the index monitoring, see, I will tell you very honestly that I don't remember now what the UK ranking was, but I know that the top 10 are all the Scandinavian democracies. They're always usually the top. And even they have started bringing many restrictions in various ways. Sweden played a despicable role in the extradition of Assange. Despicable role. A person whom I have personally known up close, Assange, yeah, who gave us the entire WikiLeaks tranche on India, which I brought back and was published in the Hindu at that time. Now, so I don't know about the UK's current ranking, but the top will be, Iceland, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. These will be the top countries, like they are the top in the Human Development Index. Like in generally in the more decent parameters of human life, they come for better or worse, they come at the top. Index monitoring cell was a committee set up by the government. Now, I have to tell you that I am a very bad talisman for committees. Government committees which I sit on vanish. They just disappear. So the government after the in 2020, the Reporters Sans Frontier, they run a thing called the World Press Freedom Index. World Press Freedom Index. India fell to 142. But let me tell you, Gopal, that India was not doing so great even when the Congress was in power. It did badly then. It did much worse, which often leads me to say that the BJP is the Congress on steroids. Arun Shori said very well once. He said the BJP is Congress plus cow. Okay, so there is this side to it. However, nobody has reached the depths that this regime has on terms of press freedom. What they did, they were very upset because they're so conscious. All that worries them, world opinion means white man's opinion. They are do they care if what Caribbean people think of them? Do they care what Brazilian people think of them? They don't give a damn. They're worried about what the English speaking white world thinks of them. And maybe after that, Western Europe. So when they got this ranking of 142, which is the lowest in history, our lowest in history, they set up a committee. How important this matter was to them, you know who ordered the forming of the committee? To rebut this, they said, the order came, I have the letter, you published it, from the Union Cabinet Secretary. That is the top ranking bureaucrat in India. He takes orders only from two people, from Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah. Okay, from the Prime Minister and the Home Minister. It used to be from the Prime Minister only, but now it's from the Home Minister also. Now, he ordered the setting up of the index monitoring cell to rebut the Reporters Sans Frontiers report. Now, they needed somebody. Now, they formed a committee on press freedom and to study the press. Out of 13 members, 11 were bureaucrats. On a committee to do with press, there were 2 journalists. They asked me, will you sit on the committee? I said, gladly, on the condition. I will make a condition. They accepted the condition. I said, I am not coming onto your committee to rebut World Press Index ranking. Because if I gave a ranking, you would be worse than 142. I will come on to your committee if we will have a study and survey of what is the condition of freedom in the Indian press. I brought up the issue of Siddiqui Kappan. I brought up these issues and said, you allow me to discuss press freedom in India, I'm on your committee. They said, yes. The chairman, who was the head of the Press Information Bureau, Director General, he said, yes, we are about freedom of press. So I came on. We had 4 meetings, full meetings of the committee, and many subgroups worked, all bureaucrats. No journalists were on the subgroups. But some of the subgroups played a useful role. I would not have known, but for the subgroups of younger bureaucrats, that the number of laws affecting media in this country is 52. There are 52 laws in this country that impinge on our work and on our profession and occupation. Right from Gramophone Act of 1931 or 32 or some such. Okay. And now we have brought in, and this does not include Epidemics and Diseases Act, which Mr. Modi has brought on to the plate. So somewhere between 50 to 60 laws are affecting media's functioning. So we had 4 meetings. 2 journalists out of a committee of 13 on press freedom. 11 bureaucrats, including researchers from government-controlled institutions. Now, out of the 2 journalists, I was one. Mr. Rajat Sharma was the other. He never spoke a word in the existence of the committee. The only time he spoke was in the second meeting to say that he could no longer attend to the committee because he was too busy. The rest of us, of course, were all unemployed vagrants who had nothing else to do but to sit on committees. Right? So he did not say a word. Then they brought 2 more journalists, of which orientation you can imagine, who didn't say a word either in the floor. Then they brought a draft report. Oh, by the way, I spoke in every meeting at length, made a presentation, made notes, gave in stuff, and to which all of them, the chairman, and said, very important points. This must be noted. Nothing appeared in the draft report. In the draft report, we ended up saying things like, the army has played a heroic role in preserving safety and freedom of journalists in Kashmir. Okay, now this is what the report said. It's all the stuff that I had said about Siddiqui Kappan, about the arrest of Tamil Nadu journalists under Epidemics Act, nothing appeared. So I wrote an independent note. I said, you don't even have to call it a dissent note, call it my independent report, my independent note. The day I gave in my note of dissent, the committee formed by the cabinet secretary vanished from the records. We never heard from anyone again. I kept sending notes, replies. No email has been issued on that ID that is now defunct. Then, another great thing about the draft report, nowhere did it say draft. Nowhere did it say draft. It was going to be released as the report. Now, when I raised this, it caused them problems. By the way, journalists from 2 newspapers have filed RTIs and not got answers. They have got confirmation that yes, such a committee did exist in history. And 4 meetings on these dates. The rest, they said, is not our department. So they're filing RTIs and nothing. So that's what happened to the committee. It has vanished. Yeah. But let's look at the consoling side of it. At least it's the report and committee that vanished, not the journalist, which also is happening. Right? That also is happening. Yeah.
It's very enjoyable in the evening, even if it continues up to 8 o'clock, we can enjoy. When I was a student in Annamalai University, I'll tell you, because when we talk about any social issues, I mean, we have more than 1,000 universities, more than 40,000 colleges in India. if you talk about any, I mean, critical issues affecting the society, I mean, absolutely there is no discourse in the universities and the colleges because of the neoliberal policies. I mean, the whole discourse has been completely changed. When I was a student in Annavale University, when teachers were on strike, I were with them.
Yeah.
They took me to jail along with the teachers. I was in jail for 30 days in Kadalur. Then I was released and there was an FIR against me. Then I went to the chief minister. I said that I supported them. They took me to the jail. I was in jail. FIR is fortunate. I mean, MJR told me, you have done a good thing. I appreciate you. I mean, it will be removed. So it was removed. Then I did my research in the same university. Then I got a job in the same university. I mean, I was working there for some time. And because when I joined with them, all the teachers, because why I joined in the, I mean, strike, because my conscience, I mean, told me that this is just cause they are working.
Yeah.
I mean, I joined. Then I joined in Gandhigram. This is a mandate, working with the community. Not only working with the community, for the last man you have to work. So it is a continuous process. But everywhere I find, after my retirement, I go there, there is no discourse on any such kind of critical issues. I mean, the marginalized people, how they are facing such a kind of problem. When I discuss with any of the faculty members, they are unaware of it. I mean, even the doctors, those who are running hospitals, I mean, absolutely, they have no, I mean, sense of such a kind of concern for the last man or the deprived man. And I will tell you, I mean, a student came to me for a PhD, and we discussed with the, I mean, I discussed with him, and you take one topic which is pertinent to this marginalized, the manual scavengers.
Yeah.
So he has taken a topic, and he's, trying to get data from the government. He couldn't, so he applied RTI. So I got a call from the officials. Sir, your student is disturbing us. I mean, you change the topic. Finally, he has completed, and with a great difficulty, because there is no such a kind of discourse. But one point of time, I mean, the middle class, I mean, the intellectuals, I mean, they played a very important role in bringing a change in the thought process of the students. But now we are training only the students for factories or political parties. This is the atrocious thing in this country. How to change it? This is the most important thing.
See,
we are facing.
I get your point. See, I mean, many of us have had similar and parallel experiences to yours. In my university days in the 70s, we were jailed frequently for things from fighting communalism to protesting against the Shah of Iran in Delhi. So that was a different world. I'm saying with the coming of neoliberalism, with 91, everything has changed. Okay, and see, a generation has grown up, or two generations are growing up with no knowledge of the past and its alternatives. There is no knowledge of that there were other alternatives. I don't blame that generation. I blame our generation. You know, that we did not sensitize our society enough to these issues, that you've been moved into what I call atomization, thinking about ourselves, the individual thing. Education is a career, not a learning, not a thinking, and not a process. It's exactly what you're saying, mirrors what I have been saying about the development of the media and the press, where it went from, where it went to. In 1970s, when I was a student in history student in JNU, all the doctoral theses, all the doctorates were about poverty, land reform. Yeah. In 30 years later, when I looked, all of, not just JNU, but how many people, I mean, the PhDs were at the best about the miracle of microfinance. This sort of a thing became the topic of PhDs. See, the moral, I say, of our media, the moral universe of the media has shifted. Actually, it's a phrase coined by Prabhat Patnaik. The moral universe of the media has shifted to the market. And education has done that. Look, here is a period when 6 vice chancellors, 3 of them actually have been found guilty of plagiarism. 2 vice chancellors, or at least so far, have been found to have fake PhDs and have had to resign. It's a disease pervading all sections of society. It's just enormously destructive. So I agree with that. How do you break that? I don't see that you can break it in that sector of education alone. In that, there is a losing battle. Look at what these people have done to Tagore's university, Vishwa Bharati. They're rooting out the idea of Tagore while starting a parallel campus for Vishwa Bharati in Uttarakhand. Tagore was the first person to establish a university in a tribal, marginalized area. The idea of a rural university came with Tagore. Now they're finishing it. The vice chancellor one vice chancellor put up Gaishalas in Tagore's thing. The other fellow has come and built walls everywhere. Remember narrow domestic walls from Gitanjali. He has put walls everywhere. He has suspended half the faculty heads of departments. Everybody is in court fighting. The government will support him. So you are, I say, well, 2014 was one thing, and 2019 I say, welcome to Upper Kali Yuga. How we fight it, that has to be done by mass struggles, by rediscovering the greater traditions within us and quite forward. Let me see with the farmers. It was a question of firstly, please do not think that farmers' protests began and ended with Delhi. There were great farmers' protests going on. In fact, the biggest of them happened in Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. In Maharashtra, it was the poorest of poor farmers, 40,000 Adivasis, who marched from Nashik to Mumbai. And look at the sensitivity of those poorest of poor farmers. They raised demands, included the demands of richer farmers which were not relevant to them. They included those demands. Yeah. In the case of Delhi, a struggle which I fully supported, I think there was too much emphasis on 2 issues. Yeah. I still support the struggle, but I'm saying a self-critical look tells me, one, it was too focused on MSP and loan waiver. Now I'll tell you why I support loan waiver and I support MSP, but why do I have a problem? Loan waiver is a band-aid. The answer to that is a proper revised credit system making cheap credit available to the poor farmers. In China, they had a thing which Dr. M.S. Swaminathan actually advocated, that method called low interest and no interest zones. Farmers in very difficult straits had low interest and no interest zones. That sort of credit should be available to them. That was Professor Swaminathan himself brought up that idea. It's been practiced in other countries. So I'm saying that we needed to be fighting for the larger revision of the credit system entirely, because what the banking system did, what the governments, both Congress and in fact the Congress did in 2013, what the Congress did was they removed the distinction between direct finance and indirect finance in banking. Direct finance was that which went directly to the farmers, indirect to the institutions, collaborating, supporting institutions. From once neoliberalism stepped into the game, increasingly the money went to indirect finance. Less and less money went in direct finance to the farmer. These numbers were so embarrassing that in 2013 the RBI simply abolished the distinction between direct and. So now corporates are getting agricultural loans. I'll give you a simple example. The state of Maharashtra, 55% rural state. Okay, 55% of the population is rural. The state of Maharashtra, NABARD, every year NABARD creates a what is called a um, PLC, a lending plan, credit lending plan, potential linked credit plan. It's called PLCP for every state. From 2017, 54% of all scheduled banks credit, 53% goes to Mumbai city. Where are the agriculturists in Mumbai city? What have Mumbai city? In Mumbai city, you don't even have contract farming, you have farming of contracts. 53% of agricultural credit is earmarked for Mumbai city. What do you have in Mumbai city? You don't have agriculturists, but you have agribusiness. Yeah, you have the headquarters of Mexico, Rasi Seeds, Monsanto, all these guys are there. So the money was going more and more. Naturally, the agrarian classes had a crisis. You were putting a credit squeeze on the farmers by giving the money intended for them, branded as agricultural credit, to non-farmers. Today, what we call agricultural credit goes entirely, almost hugely, overwhelmingly to non-farmers. That is the crux of that issue. We should be fighting for a revised credit system in agriculture. Much more important. The other problem about the farmers, and so the other emphasis on MSP. See, I think that it is necessary and important. I think it is a demand I will always support. And the role of the media and the intellectual classes in projecting that was despicable. Never one, they kept telling you the mandis are a monopoly. And this is where historical perspective becomes so important. The mandis, we have to break the monopoly of the mandis and hand it over to the monopoly of Ambani and Adani. Do you know why the mandis came into being? They came into being to break the monopoly of private traders. That's why the acts came in the 1960s. Let me put this way. Farmers were demanding reforms of the mandis for 30 years because small traders captured them again. But the fact is this, let me explain in a word why that APMC is so important. All of you here know that government schools are a mess. We know that government schools in the educational system are a mess. They have been made a mess. Does anyone argue for the shutting down of government schools? No. Because if you shut down government schools, one, half the child population will starve without that midday meal. That is the one place where children get a decent meal. Crores of children get a decent meal. And the pandemic hurt them very badly when the midday meal stopped. So the government school is so important. Second, it is the one chance for the children of the poor to get an education. So you don't. Likewise, Government hospitals, they've been devastated, destroyed, robbed of funding, etc. But if there were no government hospitals in the pandemic, how many millions more would have died? Let me sum it in one line. The APMC, is the government school of the agrarian sector. It is bad, it is flawed, it is desperately needed. You need to improve it. You're taking the approach of the man is sick, kill him. Okay, none of this was ever brought out to the public by the media, which had now Mr. Ambani is the biggest owner of media in this country. He's not only the richest Indian in the world and the richest Indian in India, he is the biggest owner of media, and those sections of the media he does not own, he is the biggest advertiser. Why are these jokers ever going to point out? Have you seen one channel, one newspaper tell you that Mr. Ambani's personal wealth is today greater than the GDP of Punjab? Yeah. Forbes 21 shows us that. He had already rivaled it, but Punjab's GDP was declining. Remember that Government of India admits to a 7.7% contraction of GDP in the first year of the pandemic. But in the first year of the pandemic, Mr. Ambani's personal wealth grew 129%, and Mr. Adani's personal wealth grew 467%. Poor fellow, he was starting from a lower base than Ambani. So, a government exists for these people. So this were the kind of problems that I have been arguing that we need. See, the Swaminathan Commission was a fantastic effort, but it was a government commission, and when they didn't like the report, they killed the report. I am now saying we need to have a Kisan Commission controlled by farmers and laborers, of independent, eminent people respected throughout the country, which will lay out a blueprint for an agrarian future in India, with mass discussion, with public hearings and everything else. So that's my answer to what we should be doing there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it is needless to point out the enormous sweep that he has covered, and also pointing out to us that many things can still be done, even in a very despicable situation. There are still areas and space where we can work, and I'm very sure that when Tilak took journalism, things were also not very rosy, nor for Gandhi. So, with that, and I remember many years ago listening to one of his talks, he said that how he never used the word vernacular. He said, he said, the Indian language, small newspapers. I remember his words. In Indian language, small newspapers have played a very, very important role in our freedom movement. And I suppose that the message still today, we have a very vibrant communication and journalism group in this Congress itself. That message can be carried, and a process of dialogue with the citizens is the vehicle and the responsibility for all of them. And I would come back to only one thing, that there is no substitute to scholarship. And since the name of Bhagat Singh has been referred to, I would still marvel one essay he wrote at the age of 16 on Punjabiyat. And there he said that Punjabis should learn different languages. And there he cited, of course, I don't know at whom he wanted to take a dig when he talked of Bengalis. Me, perhaps, I don't know. Bhagat Singh says, it is essential at this phase of our freedom struggle to know about Bengali language. So there is, I believe, no matter what you do, he learned it, he learned it himself, but I didn't know that he was learning Persian. He learned Bengali, but there's no substitute. and WhatsApp university is no university. I think these are a few of the things we should keep on hammering to the youth of the country. Thank you very much. You are doing it, and I'm very sure the process will continue. Thank you, please. Now I invite for the vote of thanks.
Mr. Chairman, uh, Sri P. Shainath ji and friends, you will agree that we had very wonderful evening. And for past 2 hours we have been discussing, and it may go on if we engage. But the very important point that he has brought, I think, to have a faith and the faith in the wisdom of the common people. When the media industry is going to the corporate, the journalism profession, the critical thinking for alternative media, he is one of the example of that. The way he uh, is doing through Pari, or yesterday, day before yesterday, we have listened, Ravi was doing the People's Newsroom. We need to understand that whenever the question comes up, change of the transfer of the classes and the corporate co-op to all those persons, I think this reminds me to the political economy of underdevelopment by Kaleski, that when there is upheavals from the society, the corporate keeps you, co-opt you, and use it. That's a historical evidence. The another evidence comes from Althusser, that the critical thinking which came through university, that has been turned to the advocacy of the corporates now. And in such a situation, if you have to deal, a proper coordination of the people with the people's intellectual, that role is still there and it works. Official intellectuals have been exposed thoroughly with their disgusted, dishonest desire, and they have sided with the government or corporates or otherwise. And what to talk of fake when the chief of the government has a fake degree? What fake we are talking now? So democracy is in peril. We are electing a person who has a fake degree. In such a situation, if we have to handle this democracy, critical thinking, communication between the facts and rigor of analysis, here is a message from Sri P. Sainath ji. The tradition that Baby Rangarao started, the great beginning that continues, I think that is a light for the future also. Whenever there is a kind of despair, I remind by Gandhi saying, when Louis Fisher asked him that, well, you are saying very, very big thing. Do you think that your farmers will be understanding these things? And he said, try to engage them. And if they agree to be communicating with you, you will find that the pulse of wisdom coming out of them. And similar was coming from the China, the faith in the masses. From masses to masses, that came a big story. With these words, I think we are grateful indeed, sir, that you are here with us this evening. You have made this evening wonderful evening, and for this Congress as well. We are thankful to our chair. And yes, the guests that they came with Sainath ji working in the field with the people, with the marginalized one, and all of you who have made this evening wonderful. Thank you so much. We all are invited. Yes. Thank you all. Tomorrow we are here in the morning by 9.